Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robin Wonsley, and I am the chair of the Administration and Enterprise Oversight Committee, and I am going to call to order our regular scheduled meeting for today, Monday, October 21st, 2024. Before we begin the meeting, I do want to offer a friendly reminder to all committee members, staff, and the public that these meetings are broadcasted live to enable greater public participation. These broadcasts include real-time captioning as a further method to increase the accessibility of our proceedings to the community. Therefore, all speakers need to be mindful of the rate of their speech so that our captioners can fully capture and transcribe all comments for the broadcast. We all ask our speakers to moderate the speed and clarity of their comments. And with that, I will ask the clerks to call the roll.
Councilmember Vita.
Present.
Allison.
Here.
Cashman.
Present.
Chuktai.
Present.
Vice Chair Palmisano.
Present.
Chair Wansley.
Present.
We have 6 present.
Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum. Also, committee members, I do want to remind everyone that we will be using speaker management today, especially when we get to discussion, which I also will note we have been joined by Councilmember Koski. So I hope that you will have a red tag down there. If not, we can ask the clerks to get you one during the discussion process. And for those who don't have speaker management in front of you, please feel free to raise your red tag. So with that, I will read the 20 items that we have on our consent agenda for the public record. The first item being a gift acceptance from Versaterm for 2 Minneapolis police employees' registration fees. Number 2 is a gift acceptance from Minneapolis Board of Business Agents of costs of refreshments. 3 is a bid for liquid sodium hydroxide. 4 is a bid for telecommunications equipment. Number 5 is a bid for 5th Street parking ramp project. Number 6 is a bid for large diameter storm main inspection and televising north project. 7 is a bid for crushing rubble concrete. 8 is a bid for bypass sewage pumps. 9 is a contract with the state of Minnesota for air quality monitoring stations on city property. 10 is contracts for 2024 housing opportunities for persons with HIV or AIDS, grant funding. 11 is a contract amendment with Trapeze Software Group, Inc. for additional professional services for the fleet and fuel management software. 12 is a contract amendment with Olson and Nesvold Engineers, PSC, for engineering and design services for 10th Avenue Bridge over the Midtown Greenway. 13 is a contract amendment with Thomas & Sons Construction, Inc. for the Green Central Safe Routes to School project. 14 is contract amendment for the Language Services Pool for interpreting and translation services. 15 is a legal settlement claim of Charles McMillan against the city of Minneapolis. 16 is a legal settlement, Village Homes at St. Anthony Falls, HO8, v. City of Minneapolis. Number 17 is a legal settlement, Alano Society of Minneapolis v. City of Minneapolis. 18 is a legal settlement workers' compensation claim of Amy Colgrove. 19 is a legal settlement workers' compensation claim of Deborah Hubert. And 20 is a legal settlement workers' compensation claim of Michael Montgomery. With that, I will ask if there's any questions that any committee members have. Okay, with that, I will actually ask the clerks to do a roll call vote on all items.
Councilmember Vita.
Aye.
Allison.
Aye.
Cashman.
Aye.
Chuktai.
Aye.
Vice Chair Palmisano.
Aye.
Chair Wansley.
Aye on all but items 18 and 19.
Items 1 through 17 and 20 have 6 ayes, and 18 and 19 have 5 ayes and 1 nay.
Awesome. Right, those items carry and will be forwarded to full council. Our next item is a receive and file from finance related to the third quarter staff purchasing letters and joint purchase letters for any low bid awards of cooperative purchasing ventures. While there's no presentation for this item, I do want colleagues to know that staff are available for questions. And I will check to see if there's any questions in queue. I don't see any. Okay, with that, seeing no further discussion, I will ask the clerks to file that report. Our next item, item 22. This item is a presentation related to a report of the third quarter contract awards or amendments for federal grants. This report lists actions taken by the CFO to expedite the approval of new contracts or contract amendments that use ARPA, ESG, CDBG, CDC, or state DHH funds. That was a lot of acronyms. We'll invite Kamal Buchanan, the procurement manager in finance, to provide a brief presentation on this item.
Thank you, Chair Wansley, council members. My name is Kamal Buchanan, procurement manager, and I am here to speak on this item today. Before I discuss and bring you to the current report, I want to go back in a little bit of history as to my involvement in this process. So in 2021, there was a council action 2021-0065, which authorized the chief financial officer to incur expenditures for ARPA funds and also COVID-19 grant funds. And the mechanism which allowed the chief financial officer to approve contracts and contract amendments. And the mechanism that was used to allow the chief financial officer to grant these approvals was a report to the finance office. So through this report, anytime there was a department had a need to award a contract that would be using ARPA funds or to amend a contract to add ARPA funds to it, the department would need to send me a request via email and provide me the name of the ARPA budget proposal that was being used and also the amount of the increase, and then also the names of the vendors and amounts that would be awarded for a contract. I mean, through that process, I would then create the report to the finance officer document and submit that document to the chief financial officer for review. And that was reviewed by the chief financial officer and an ad hoc group. I would await their decision, and then from there, I would then receive the document, and that was done on a weekly basis starting back in 2021. And every week, I would receive any requests that departments would submit, and then I would then submit all received reports to the Committee of the Whole as a receive and file item. That item, I would continue that process on a weekly basis up until the end of 2021. And then starting in 2022 through 2023, departments would be able to submit their requests on the every 2 weeks, and I would fill those requests, draft a report to finance officer document, and await the chief financial officer's decision. Once a decision had been made, then again I would submit every 2 weeks the all assigned documents to the Committee of the Whole committee as a receive and file item. And so that leads us to this year, 2024, when a decision was made to all reports to the finance officer that were signed would be filed and submitted to this committee as a receive and file item. So for 2024, instead of it being every month where I would submit this request, it was decided that the report would be compiled on a monthly basis, but it wouldn't be submitted until on a quarterly basis. So that leads us to this report. This report, it was just one report for the month of September. It was a report for approval of contracts for community trauma services. And from there, then that report was signed and submitted to this committee as a receiving file item. And I stand for questions, if any.
Thank you, Kamal, for that overview. I did put myself in queue because I did have some questions for the department's lead over the community trauma response funding, and I do believe we have Director Nelson Brown here.
Yes.
So, thank you.
Good afternoon, committee and Chair Wansley.
Good afternoon. Thank you. So just the first question I had in reviewing the organizations that were granted, I believe, ARPA dollars under the community trauma response funding, it seems that mostly these organizations were located either north side or in the downtown area. So I wanted to get a sense of if there were any south side organizations that were given contract for the community trauma response or de-escalation initiative. And also just following up on a line of inquiry that I know Councilmember Cashman has raised, how geography was factored into the consideration of these contracts.
Thank you, Chair Wansley, for that question. I do not have in front of me the list of proposals that came in. I would be happy to kind of gather that and, get a better response looking at the proposals that came in. So we have to make decisions based on the proposals that come in. We certainly take geography into consideration, also high crime rate areas, as well as the proposals themselves and the services that are proposed to happen in the proposal, which I don't have in front of me. So I can't give a comprehensive answer to that right now. But those are all factors that we instruct reviewers to take into consideration as they review the proposals.
And I will just mark then for staff as a follow-up staff memo question, just the two pieces of, were there any organizations that are based in South Minneapolis that were selected for the community trauma response or the de-escalation initiative, and how geography was factored into consideration of those contracts? My next question is, again, on the report, I do see the Black Business Enterprise Fund listed, which I know we're going to be discussing in the next item a little bit further. I will say I was also surprised to see them here, since their work thus far has seemed to be around business development. There's also another organization listed called Let's Learn Collectively on Our Life's Journey that has a mission to simplify government bureaucracy for all. Which sounds like it has some asset in terms of some level of governance, but I'm not seeing the clearest connection of trauma response and de-escalation work to their mission. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to know if there's any context as to how these groups were selected, if it seems like their mission statements is outside the scope of a focus for the community trauma response funding. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you, Chair Wansley, for that question. Again, not having those in front of me, it's difficult for me to say exactly, but I can shed some light on the review process that I think might be helpful. When we put out a proposal, we are expressing the need that we see that we have, that we want vendors to meet, the need that we want vendors to meet. In order to ensure an equitable and fair process, and to ensure that we are increasing access for both larger corporations and the small business owner, we instruct reviewers to review the information in front of them. And we we hold true that what is put in that proposal is accurate and reflective of the ability of the organization to provide the services. So as we review, we are only looking at the information that is put in front of us. To look at outside information, and we instruct reviewers not to do that. So to look at websites or anything that's not in that proposal could potentially create bias in a sense where, naturally we would be prone to thinking favorably about an organization that is larger that could hire a professional grant writer or hire a team of web developers. So we steer away from that so that we can be equitable and fair and increase access, particularly to our small businesses and our businesses that are by and for, led by marginalized communities, providing services to marginalized communities. So I hope that sheds a little bit of light without having the specific details.
And I'll note that also for a staff follow-up. I'll send you the question, Michael, but can you also share a little bit of how the selection or selectors or actually reviewers are selected? Is that process led by NSD or is that led through procurement?
That process is led by NSD, but with all of our proposals, they're all collaborative. So we have begun working with procurement, finance, and city attorneys to put together the proposal that we release to the public. NSD then has a large list of potential reviewers that we invite to review. As we go out and we network and we meet other people doing the work, we add potential reviewers to the list. And at that point, we allow people to let us know whether or not they have the capacity to review, because the review is quite extensive and a little labor intensive, especially with this particular proposal. There was, I believe, upwards of 25 proposals that came in. And we get a list of reviewers. Per procurement policies, we have to have at least 3 reviewers. I'd have to look back to see how many reviewers we had on this particular proposal, but it was at least 3. I believe it was quite a bit more than that. We had a good response for this one. And then we hold an education session with those reviewers to make sure that they understand what the needs are. What I laid out just a little bit ago about not using outside information. We address confirmation bias and biases that can slip in. And at that point, we check in with those reviewers to see if they're still comfortable and if they understand the process that they're entering into.
And is there any, either based off of procurement guidelines, is there any set kind of expectations or criteria that you have to meet in order to be selected as a reviewer, either by NSD or, again, by procurement guidelines?
Yes, there is, at that point, once we educate the reviewers, we then ask reviewers if, looking at the list of applications, if there is a potential conflict of interest. If so, we request that they sign a conflict of interest policy and recuse themselves from review or selection of the application. Once we do that, then we have our set list of reviewers. NSD prefers that our reviewers have some knowledge of violence prevention, intervention, and response and restoration, that has some experience on previous review is also very helpful. And if they have any collaborative work with the department, that is also very helpful as well. So we take a comprehensive approach as we are inviting reviewers, and then we screen out based on conflict, the same way council members would recuse themselves if so, for lack of a better term. And then we have our final reviewers, and then we hold another educational session, and we move forward with review. We also give a deadline for review, and we ask for written responses from the reviewers on each proposal. We also give a scoring rubric so that reviewers can score those applications based on the criteria listed in the RFP, which was designed in collaboration with procurement, city attorney, and finance. And then the department takes the highest scoring applications to then fund.
Thank you for laying out that process. And it sounds like clerks, you have the 2 questions for follow-up. Awesome. So I will see if there's no one else in queue. Thank you for providing that.
Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I will ask the clerks to file that report as well. Moving on to our next item, which is item 23, the contract with the Black Business Enterprise Fund. So this is related, again, to a contract with BBE for capacity building and compliance consulting services. This was also an item that was continued from our prior meeting on October 7th. There was a staff memo request made at our prior meeting, and staff did respond to that request on the 16th. But I will ask if there's any further discussions or questions. I see Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, Chair Wansley. I just wanted to say that I'm going to need to recuse myself. The CEO of, I think it's Black Enterprise, what is it?
Black Business.
Black Business Enterprise Fund notified the city attorney's office that they helped a family member of mine with their business, and I'm not sure who that family member is, but just so that I'm on the up and up, I just want to completely recuse myself of this.
Thank you for knowing that for public record. Is there any additional? I will put myself in queue. So first, I will say I do want to thank the Neighborhood Safety Department for taking the time to meet with my office and my staff in between the last meeting to talk through some of the questions and concerns that came up during our consideration of this item. Also, just like you just did, NSC staff was able to share more context about the procurement process for professional services, which did provide some clarity. I will say, though, I still have a number of concerns about why we are not relying on subject matter experts or our existing technical assistance providers, and about this vendor's capacity to execute the scope of services that were articulated. But that said, my primary concern with this contract is the fact that we do need to invest in the infrastructure of the Neighborhood Safety Department rather than continuing this practice of outsourcing that work via contracts. And the Safe and Thriving Communities Plan outlines the importance of building in-house infrastructure within key departments like this that's helping implement the Safe and Thriving Communities Plan. And we absolutely need to be building a neighborhood safety department that can support the scale of unarmed public safety services and programs that we offer to our residents. And instead of spending millions of dollars on a contract to hire 17 people, I would much rather use those dollars to add that staff capacity in-house at NSD, and hopefully, again, create an infrastructure that could support this work for years and years to come. Last year, during the budget process, I know a number of colleagues and myself attempted to provide that staff capacity, especially as it pertains to financial administration and compliance to NSD, but our Office of Community Safety Leadership wrote us a memo saying that they did not need additional staff for NSD. And mere weeks later, after that memo was sent, we would soon learn that the department's, NSD in particular, began to fall behind on basic tasks like fulfilling invoices. We heard from staff about the challenges of dealing with staff turnover and that staffing shortage. And I do know a few positions were added, but there still seems, even with that added staff capacity, to be a substandard completion of those type of tasks of like fulfilling invoices. And I know we keep hearing, again, about the stressors of this workload and growing workload amongst NSD staff members. And I believe as of August, there were still about 11 vacant positions in NSD. And again, I think that's just a testament to we need to be devoting a lot of energy towards building the internal infrastructure of this department. And I will name, too, it's been challenging to see the persistent failures when it's come to management around the Neighborhood Safety Department, where we've outlined a number of these concerns and have offered opportunities of collaboration, and it's still not yielding at the fruits that I think we all want to see. But regardless, I would really love to see us start investing resources into the infrastructure of this department. I would like to see that $1 million that we're being asked to consider for this contract instead be used to hire staff to accomplish this work and start to rehabilitate the department to be a functional one. And this could be through a combination of temporary or permanent staff as needed. And perhaps we can even repurpose some of those vacancy savings from those 11 positions to supplement that work. With that said, I won't be supporting this item. And in fact, I will be making a motion to refer it back to staff because, again, I want to see us invest in our city's internal infrastructure. So with that, I will ask for a second, and then
Second.
Thank you. And I see Councilmember Cashman in queue.
Thank you, Chair Wansley. Thank you, Director Nelson Brown, for offering to meet to discuss this further. I had hoped that we would see the proposal from the request of the Black Business Enterprise Fund, and that was not possible, although I did note that in the case of other requests for proposals in the committee that I chair, I have asked to see proposals before we take a vote on it and have been granted that. So I was just wondering if, Clerk Michael or any attorney here could speak to our procurement policy on the council's ability to see a proposal before we take a vote on it.
Councilmember Cashman. So the proposals under the Data Practices Act are classified as protected non-public data. What that means, though, is that you can access it if you have a business reason to access it. So I do believe, since the City Council votes on these items, that in certain circumstances, they can be made available to the City Council members because there is a business reason to view the RFP before you vote and make a decision on whether or not to award the contract.
Okay, that's really helpful. So am I understanding correctly that it is sort of on a case-by-case basis that the department leader and also the proposer of the RFP may allow for council to see it?
Councilmember Cashman, I guess the proposer would have no role in that. Ideally, that would be a case where the department would consult with the city attorney's office.
Okay, that's really helpful. And then Director Nelson Brown, could you speak to just generally those 11 vacancies in the department and why they haven't been able to be filled, or why it's been prioritized to outsource this work to, $1 million contract for 17 external experts versus hiring in-house?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Wansley, and thank you, Councilmember Cashman, for that question. 11 is incorrect. We do not have 11 vacancies in the Department of Neighborhood Safety. Currently, we have 5 vacancies. Actually, 4, because one person started today. There is another person that starts in 2 weeks, which takes us down to 3. Those 3 are in the process of either final interview. One is in final interview, and the other 2 are in HR for opening. So we do not have that. That number is absolutely incorrect. We typically go, as department heads in general, go through the budget process to request additional staffing. I want to kind of add to one of Councilmember Wansley's comments. There have been no staff added to the Neighborhood Safety Department. What has happened is I took already allocated positions and reclassified those to better meet the needs of this deficit around fiscal accountability and responsibility. This has been a weakness that's been noted for years, noted in the Safe and Thriving Communities report. And so my first day in the office, I started implementing protocols to ensure fiscal accountability. It's the fair thing to do for the taxpaying citizen, for us to be able to know exactly where the funds and the dollars go, and that requires documentation, which is a heavy administrative lift, and why I don't say any of this to disparage previous leadership or previous staff. Previous staff and leadership did an amazing job, upstanding, important services at a time when the city was on fire. That said, they were also very under-resourced. Once the department moved out of the health department, we lost the support of the health department. There were about 5 positions that used to provide support to the Office of Violence Prevention that stayed in the health department. So the neighborhood safety department did not receive those positions. In addition, we were also given a huge initiative that is 24/7 behavioral crisis response to run from our department that the Office of Violence Prevention did not have. And the staff that managed that initiative stayed within the PMI/OVP back then, or OPI back then department. So that initiative came to us without additional staff. So in essence, we're about 6 staff down from where OVP was, and OVP was understaffed and struggling with obtaining proper documentation in order for us to effectively say to taxpayers, this is how your money is being spent. So this RFP is another example of a protocol I want to put in place in order to bring the department into full compliance. It is also in alignment with the settlement that we reached, agreement that we reached recently. And I want to add that the reason we were able to meet that agreement is because I acted quickly in implementing protocols to bring the department into compliance. I asked for positions through the budget process. That was done. I had conversations with administration, and we did come up with a plan to phase in additional positions as we move forward. But for this budget process, and I do my budget presentation tomorrow, I did not receive additional positions. I do believe that very strongly, and I think I've been kind of vocal about this, that there does need to be infrastructure in this department if we are going to really do this work correctly. I've said a few other times on the dais that other cities that do this work have upwards of 50 staff members or more, and that is necessary to do this work properly and to be in full compliance as any other department would be. So I hope that answers.
That's really helpful. Thank you for detailing the explanation, and I hope that in the future, just on all of our committees, that we can work with the city attorney's office to see some of these proposals before they come to a vote, because it is almost $1 million, right, to be invested.
Right.
And I'm really looking forward. I'm going to support the chair's motion to refer this item back to staff, and definitely look forward to your departmental presentation tomorrow to see how we can continue to support scaling up the capacity internally of NSD. So
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And I do want to know, again, I referenced the vacancies from the FTE report, which did show there were 11 as of August. And
Yeah.
I think I prefaced that. So it's good to know, it sounds like you've been on ramping at least like 5 positions since.
Exactly.
But with that, I will ask the clerk, seeing there's no additional folks in queue, to call the roll with the exception of Councilmember Vitaw. Oh, that's Councilmember Vitaw can also abstain. Yeah, okay.
Councilmember Vitaw? No, you can abstain. Apologies.
Yeah.
Allison?
Aye, to refer back to staff.
Cashman?
aye.
Chicktack?
Aye.
Vice Chair Palmisano?
Aye.
Chair Wansley?
Aye.
We
Thank
have
you.
5 ayes.
That motion carries. And next item is 24, which is a policy and research presentation on law enforcement recruitment. That was a staff motion completed by Councilmember Koski. This presentation is going to be provided by the City Auditor's Policy and Research Division, and I will now invite the staff to begin their presentation.
All right. Good morning, Chair Wansley, Vice Chair Palmisano, and members of the committee. My name is Andrew Hawkins. I'm with the City Auditor's Policy and Research Division. I'm here to talk to you today about law enforcement recruitment, hiring, and retention practices. Just the background on this came to us on March 25th from this committee. The staff direction was that the analysis would include policies, incentives, any outcomes from the various, again, from the review of nationwide hiring practices, law enforcement agencies, looking at the hiring processes in terms of what they entailed, what was required, what the timelines were, and then any information about retention, incentives, programs, things of that nature. To begin, just with an overview into kind of the national landscape of recruitment and hiring practices. Yeah, I think the buzzword you're going to hear a lot when you look into this is the innovative recruiting strategies. As far as what these look like, and we'll get into some examples later in the presentation, but one of the biggest ones is relationship recruitment. The idea behind this is it's more of a, again, I think an interactive process for candidates as opposed to the traditional, go to a job site, find a job, apply for the job, wait several months, and then hear back. There's multiple check-ins from, again, more than just one member with the recruitment team. This is where cities will have dedicated groups of staff that reach out to candidates following the receipt of an application, if there's, to let them know what to expect next, what to gather, provide updates about what the status of their application may be. And so again, it's a lot more conversational along the process, and it does seem like that does pay some dividends as opposed to the old approach of, everybody's just sort of a number in the machine. Another thing that we've seen with in the line of the innovative recruiting strategies is the use of a continuous application cycle versus a traditional approach where you would have a window of time that was available for people to apply. When that window closed, if they in the event that they had gone to the job site looking, they wouldn't see anything. So now it's basically continuously open until there's no longer a need, and so that allows them to be taking in applications year round. And then I think building on that, what we've definitely seen from some other departments is even though you have a continuous cycle, you still only have so many academies every year for those entering through the cadet program. What ends up happening is that sometimes you have somebody that's going to be slated for a candidate or an academy program, but it doesn't occur for 3-4 months, and there was a threat that they would end up losing those candidates to other programs that were starting more soon. So what they're doing is they're finding ways to actually hire those people on into other roles while they wait for the academy to begin. Next, just looking at attracting a diverse candidate pool. This is definitely something that I think was highlighted by every department and a recommendation around this area. One of the biggest things that we've seen nationwide is just a massive expansion of the advertising, marketing, social media campaigns from departments. Again, this can be everything from YouTube to Twitter to Facebook to individual websites for law enforcement recruitment as opposed to just having the hiring site exist on a city website like everything else. And then lastly, looking, kind of rethinking the traditional recruitment and versus pathways programs. Again, traditional recruitment would just be what I described, where you have cadets that will go through an academy class, or you can have lateral transfers. Pathway programs, the idea is it's an upstream approach. So these can be partnered with either schools, there's also like a school career path. They can exist on their own as an extension of the department that's operated that way. They can exist through private entities. And the idea is that they'll serve as a pipeline for individuals that might be interested in a career in law enforcement to become engaged with the field and learn more about it at an earlier stage. Next, looking at hiring incentive programs. The biggest thing here, obviously, won't be news to anyone since I think it gets a lot of attention, is the bonus and one-time payments. This certainly exists across the entirety of the country. What it looks like varies fairly wildly depending on where you're going to look. The most common types of bonuses and one-time payments that we see that serve as hiring incentives are the recruitment and hiring bonuses, which again, the recruitment one would be paid out when somebody enters into the academy or once they've signed a letter, an offer letter. The hiring ones are just usually more delayed until they've completed both the academy and their field training and become a full-time officer. Retention bonuses we haven't seen as much of. I think there are a number of cities that have experimented with them. But this is an area that's still, again, the retention idea is still being studied as far as what keeps people with the department. Lastly, we see the referral. One of the consistent themes across all of the research on this topic, the best recruiters for a department are generally the individuals that are employed by it. And so the idea behind referral bonuses is to, I think, incentivize officers to act in their capacity as recruiters for the department itself. Next, we have the cost of living and lifestyle incentives. This one, again, it's going to vary extremely depending on where you're looking across the country, but this can take the form of anything from rental assistance and home buyers programs. One of the very new things that we've seen is child care assistance or programs. San Diego, I think, has the only program right now that's actually operated explicitly for law enforcement officers. And I think the idea there is that it's targeted towards, I think it might be officers and fire department officials. Just they have very non-traditional hours. Child care is a challenge to anybody, as everyone knows. So I think it's notable that this is starting to be something that we're seeing more of. Next, looking at some local and national examples. With St. Paul, obviously, as a basis for comparison, that's the easiest one to go to when we want to see what's happening locally. Right now, St. Paul does have a number of pathway programs, including their cadet and community liaison trainee program. They also have the community liaison officer and parking enforcement officer that are pathway programs where individuals become employed with the city in those roles and then have a window of time to complete their 2-year and certification to become post-licensed and to join the department and be enrolled in an academy. As far as hiring timelines, their hiring process runs between 4 and 5 months. Their academy is 4 months, and their field training is 4 months. With the incentive that they're able to offer right now, the IC-POET, which is the Intensive Comprehensive Police Officer Training Program, they did receive some money through that and through the Community-Oriented Policing Services Grant, where they're now covering the cost of certification. Otherwise, they do provide tuition assistance through their, I believe, the same program that's available to city employees. Next, we looked at Duluth. For pathways, not quite as many. Again, like the reason I selected Duluth is just to kind of find a city that would be somewhere in between, Minneapolis and St. Paul, and then what you'd consider more of the suburbs. The police officer recruit program, that's the most traditional one where individuals receive their certification, enroll in the academy. They do have a community service officer intern program as well as a paid internship program that they partner with universities on. They generally will look for criminology students through those programs with the idea of it kind of being a pathway that begins at an earlier stage, especially since they do have a number of academic institutions up there. The idea is to retain the people that are there rather than risking them graduating and pursuing work elsewhere. For timelines, they're just over 5 months for their hiring process. It's 380 hours for their academy and 4 months for field training. Jumping out to national examples, looked at Cleveland. Again, for all of these, there's generally 1 or 2 things that jumped out, which was what led to them being included. In Cleveland, I can go through this, but then I will highlight the item of interest there was their expedited hiring events. So pathways, again, this is the definition of traditional. It's police cadets becoming patrol officers. It's a 4 to 6 month process. But they do have expedited hiring events, which can lead to a potential offer in 1 day. A recent example of the success, they had 361 applicants in one day. And what they do at these events is they have everybody on site and made available to potential candidates, including the physical fitness test, the interview process, fingerprinting. And so they can get a lot of that done while the individual's there and up front, and then they run background. And then, again, the individual can get on board sooner. Looking at, their academy is going to be 7.5 months, and field training is 25 weeks. Their current incentives upon graduation from the academy is $5,000, and then they also have a tuition reimbursement program of $6,000 a year. Looking at Seattle, Pathways, same as Cleveland. This was just the one. Their timelines right now are 4 to 5 months. Academy is 4.5. Advanced training is 4 weeks. And then field training was fairly unique, where they don't pin down a number. It's just performance dependent. So it's going to depend on the performance of the officer and how that's assessed by the field training officer. For incentives, this is actually currently in the midst. This could potentially change. It's been continuously evolving, but it's $7,500 is their hiring bonus. For lateral transfers, they have $30,000. The reason that Seattle was chosen is it's in a, I don't know, I guess for lack of a better way to frame this, it's in an incentive battle. It exists in an area where there's a lot of cities of similar size, and basically what happens is one of them offers an incentive for recruits. That means a competing department has to offer the same incentive, and it continues to kind of go around and around and up, and competing for the same candidate pool. Austin, Texas, again, similar to the other ones, this is the police cadet program. There's just not a lot of expansion there as far as the Pathways programs go. The timeline, this one, same, it just hasn't caught up to other places. It's 6 to 12 months. They also have multiple points in the process that require the individual to do an in-person visit, at various stages of the process, which I think is something that can create a challenge to drawing in people that might not be local. Their academy is 6 to 8 months. Field training is 3 to 4. Getting into incentives, this is where we start to see, I think, a larger kind of swath beyond just the $15,000 incentive. Once the individual is hired, they have $2,100 for bilingual pay. They have a range of education expenses to cover tuition, reimbursement, and just ongoing payment. The tuition reimbursement is capped at $3,000 a year. The last example is from Baltimore. Again, Pathways programs, we're not seeing a lot of differentiation here. Their hiring timelines also kind of mirror what we've seen from other localities in 4 to 6 months, a 6-month academy and a 10-week field training. The reason Baltimore was selected is it's a fairly good example of just essentially just a large range of incentive programs. They do have the signing bonus upon academy graduation of $10,000. But they also have a tuition reimbursement, a referral bonus for BPD officers. They have a relocation assistance, which is $12,000 spread over the course of 12 months to provide, again, just the moving costs and rental assistance. They also, this is the only example I saw just in doing this research of a property tax credit for officers that reside within Baltimore of $2,500. And actually, this was one I know was just in the works while this report was being done, but it was approved, and I think effective in January. They're going to pilot a child care program for 100 Baltimore Police Department members that provides, I believe, $3,000 annually in assistance and access to emergency child care, which in this case just means child care outside of traditional hours. Now, taking a look at the Minneapolis Police Department. Similar to St. Paul and Duluth, but different from, again, the examples that we saw nationally. There's multiple pathway programs that are offered to bring people in, to bring in potential police officer candidates. The recruit program, the police cadet program, and the community service officer program. So the cadet program, or I'm going to switch these around. I believe the recruit program is they need to get their certification still. The cadet program, they can go into the academy, and then the community service officer, they'll be in that role while they pursue the 2-year degree that's required by post, and then receive their certification. Timelines this is from review of the application to the beginning of the academy is 6 months. The academy is 14 to 16 weeks, and field training is 6 months. For incentives, right now, between the examples that I used from Duluth and St. Paul, I think Minneapolis is the only one that's providing 100% of the degree and certification tuition to potential candidates. St. Paul's starting to do that using the grant program, and I believe Duluth is offering, again, just their, they'll provide some of the cost, but I don't think it covers everything. This is also one of the few where actually the gym memberships I called out doesn't seem like a lot, but as we know, those can be expensive. So I did want to note that that's one of the unique ones that I saw. As far as the structure and approach to recruitment, there's currently two, I mean, they can work together, but there's currently 2 teams that MPD employs. There's one that's made up of 5 civilian staff and one that's made up of 2 sworn staff. This was fairly unique from what I was able to see across the country. Generally, the recruitment teams are going to be sworn officers. There might be an HR person that's a civilian, but the fact that MPD is utilizing both versions of the team was unique. Their approach to recruitment, as I mentioned previously, they've adopted the continuous recruitment model with multiple contacts and check-ins just to make sure that they're continuously communicating with candidates. As far as how the pathways are utilized, so we're seeing high volumes of in-state. There are some more than others where they're getting, I believe it was up to 5% from Wisconsin, Iowa. There wasn't, but none of these were seeing massive influx of people from outside of this kind of geographical area. But yeah, you have 86 of the laterals have been in state, 73% of police recruits, and 88% of the CSOs. Application volume and candidate demographics. This is one where you're going to see a really big increase. From 2023 to 2024, there's been a 61% increase. In the 2024 applications, 85% were male, 15% were female, and then 64% of applicants were minority candidates. Just looking at the increases from 23 to 24, again, there's not a single demographic group that did not see a fairly sizable increase. Some of this can, I think, be contributed to the Imagine Yourself campaign that's been that MPD has implemented this year. They also, again, another, just to highlight something that recently happened, when looking kind of at non-traditional avenues for police recruits, one of the ones that was called out that there's been barriers there before, Minnesota now allows it, is permanent residents that might not be citizens. MPD just added its first officer from that group. Looking at challenges and options. The first is just available candidate pools. So this is where, again, I kind of alluded to it with the incentives issue in Seattle, but there's a degree of regionality to all of this, which is you have a certain amount of the population that wants to pursue this as a career in a specific area, and they're willing to travel only so far. So the battles that end up coming out with this is, what's the one thing that's going to, pull people in one direction versus another between cities that might be in that area. It's also, again, there's a finite amount of people that make up, what the pool looks like there. So there's certain strategies that, that might work in the immediate but aren't long-term strategies. So one of these, I think, is probably the over-reliance on lateral transfers. Again, in order to have a pool of candidates for lateral, you have to have people that have gone through the academies, that have the certifications that are necessary to do so. At a certain point, that pool is going to be gone if you're not focused on getting people through the academy and building that capacity in-house. Additionally, the female candidate recruitment, there's currently a national organization that's promoting what's called the 30 by 30 initiative. The goal of this program is to have police recruitment classes reach 30% of all applicants being female by 2030. So Minneapolis is currently signed on as a member of this initiative. Again, the fact that it exists highlights the issue that it's trying to address, which is there's just not that females have been predominantly underrepresented. In police recruitment, there's a number of programs that this organization actually emphasizes and provides kind of guidance to law enforcement agencies. with how they can improve their recruitment of female candidates, where there might be some barriers, and whether it's a hiring process, whatever it might be, that they could look at changing in order to continue to build those numbers up. Next, resources. This is not going to come as a surprise. Resources are always going to be an issue, anywhere with anything. However, looking at these in the two buckets, financial resources will dictate what benefits or options are possible. Again, the more money the Department of Ed has access to, the more potential programs they could roll out, or the more people it could potentially reach. And then looking at personnel, this is actually trying to highlight that beyond just just looking at shortages as impacting the ability to provide coverage for a certain area. It also limits training and unique roles that are available. Usually some of those can be the first to be cut if there's not adequate people. What we've seen nationwide is that highlighting like kind of all of these different roles that might be available for potential candidates that they might not have been aware of is a pretty valuable recruitment tool. If you don't have enough officers to fill all those roles, then they're not really there to pitch to people. So I think that was one limitation that stemmed from that. And then lastly, just available data. There's a lot of research on this. There's actually research of the research, which is included in the larger report, that shows that looking at issues like retention, there was not a lot of, I think, time and energy put into it up until very recently. And so this was just always kind of viewed as a traditional occupation where they had a consistent stream of applicants and nobody gave it much thought. However, in the last 10 years, we've seen a definite spike. And I think one of the things that it highlights is that just having available data to know what's working is extremely important. Last, sorry, my voice is giving out a little bit here. Lastly, potential options for consideration. One of them is the partnerships and pathways. I think, especially for any recruiting effort, there can never be too many as far as where you're trying to draw people from, especially if you're looking at wanting to get, again, a more diverse pool of candidates than you may have gotten in the past. The example we pulled here, the St. Paul Police Department and the Minnesota National Guard have partnered using the PACE program, which is the Partnership for Your Success, which connects Guard members with the St. Paul Police Department for potential interviews and placement upon their completion of their Guard service. Also identifying the demand and cost benefit for specific targeted incentive programs. I have some examples here, but I think this one, this can go back to the data and figuring out just what your options are. We've seen cities like, again, I can pick on Seattle, I guess, where they have the incentive, it hasn't really gone beyond that. And so to the extent that that's successful, that's really the only potential thing that they've considered. Whereas you have other cities like Baltimore where they've got a broader range of potential incentives that might not be for everybody, but that some will certainly want to opt into. And I think it gives candidates a little bit more control over identifying what their like what ones match with their priorities, as opposed to just a lump sum payment when you start. And finally, we have increased opportunities for input and continuous assessment. There were a few examples from some departments nationally where they were doing applicant surveys for all candidates, not just candidates that were selected. And this included candidates that had accepted positions with other law enforcement agencies. Again, the whole idea there is there's no bad feedback, and kind of understanding what might have turned people away or led to them signing with another department was something that would give them that data point that they could then figure out, how much of that is within their control, what can they do on their end to potentially avoid this in the future. And then another example is just input from staff that have been onboarded. So once you've made the hires, connecting, like following back up with everybody to figure out, did your experience mirror what you thought it may? What were some areas where, we need to do better about clarifying what the role might be, as well as, was there anything that we didn't really cover, when you were being recruited that you feel like it's worth highlighting to potential candidates? With that, again, I know this is this topic, it's important to note, is continuously evolving. I think just from the time that the report was submitted to now, I think a number of these cities have brought up new and different programs. Baltimore has approved its pilot program. So it's a very interesting topic, but it's definitely one that's being continuously assessed as departments are competing for candidates. But with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that presentation. I will see if the author of the directive, if they have outright, I see Councilmember Koski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just waiting to see if any committee members had questions before I went, but happy to start off with my row of questions here. So thank you so much for this presentation. I know you've been working hard on this since March, and I really appreciate all of the work that you've put into this. I do have a series of questions, so bear with me. So it could be, some in order and some as I was taking notes here and listening to the messages too here. So I would say, can you compare the city's recruitment process and the relationship recruiting process? What are the main differences? I think I heard you call us the continuous recruitment, or maybe I misunderstood what that meant.
Yep. Chair Wansley, Councilmember Koski. Minneapolis, again, it's a version of the continuous recruitment process, which is the posting's always open. So people can apply on a rolling basis, and then they'll be, again, as they advance through the process, for anybody that's ultimately selected, they'll then be placed in the next academy when that occurs. So that's the continuous. It just means there's not a window. There's not one window for applicants where this posting closes on this date. The relationship recruitment piece, that's just, I think it's more check-ins. It's almost, again, for lack of a better analogy, it's almost like a caseworker for the applicant, where they'll reach out. Here's where we are in the process. Here's where your application is. Here's what's next. Here's what you can expect. And when you get to this stage, instead of just sort of like letting candidates fend for themselves while they're waiting to hear back. So I think the idea there is making sure that while you're continuously communicating, it's less likely that in the absence of hearing back, they're going to begin pursuing other opportunities at other agencies.
Just a follow-up question on that. I think you had noted that we have 5 civilian staff and 2 sworn staff. Those that are utilizing the relationship recruiting process, how much staff do they have? I know that I understand that most of them are utilizing sworn staff, but just curious, we have 7. That's a lot more potential, touch points. I'm just curious to know, did that require more staff, or were they able to do it with about the same amount of staff that we have?
As a basis for comparison, I think I believe it was Austin has 5 right now. The team size varied, and then I think the other thing that some cities have done is they've actually they've started kind of through the social media and advertising approach to highlight individual officers and kind of their story as far as how they got to what made them want to become an officer, what's their experience been like, and then actually leveraging those individuals to also do some of this. So I don't know that there's necessarily a number. I mean, I think the more people you have, the more that you have the ability to do it. But I think there'll probably will be more clarity on that. Once MPD has the data, I know they presented it a week or 2 ago. But just like what the impact has been of what was, I believe, like a 61% increase in applications. Obviously, the more people that are applying, the more demand it's going to be on that team to maintain that continuous communication. I think as capacity allows for, I think that the touch points just drop off. So instead of being able to reach out every couple of days, it might be every couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Next question I have, it looks like MPD has a higher recruitment timeline, 2 months higher max timeline than other departments in the state. Were you able to figure out what's driving that?
As far as the timelines go, I think compared to locally, they're doing, I think it's fairly similar to St. Paul and Duluth. Nationally, there are some that are doing it quicker. I think with the Cleveland example, getting 10 steps out of the way on a single day can help cut pretty sizable chunks out of that, and especially when there are items that just require you to be in person. I will note, MPD, it's as far as the accessibility of the application process, it's done a fairly good job of making anything that can be virtual. There were other areas, Austin was one of them, that require, again, they just for whatever reason, candidates had to come in multiple times. So if you get somebody that's from further away, that could be a hindrance. But I think that the one-day recruitment idea, the person's already there. And so the Cleveland's trying to get as many of those things that require the in-person component of that out of the way in one day. So I think that's where we've seen some of them be able to cut down the timelines themselves.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to follow up on that later here, but so on the MPD application demographic data, the demographic category percent increase compared to 2023 take into consideration the overall increase in applications. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So that would be the increase in total applicants compared to the previous year.
Okay, so then from 23 to 24, overall applications have increased, and so have the demographic categories increased to the amount expected?
So with that one, the percentage change, since the total number of candidates was taken out of the total population, the percent change from 23 to 24 would reflect the improvement, not just a higher volume.
Okay.
I'm sorry for the confusion on that one.
Okay, that's helpful. So the report includes an assessment of recruitment bonuses as a recruitment strategy. I found the information provided in this section really informative. The information I found most valuable is the recruitment bonuses have a strong regional component, serve primarily as a tipping point factor in candidate decision-making. Also, that this strategy can cause and escalate the revolving door effect. A few questions in relation to that information. What do you believe from your research could be other tipping point factors that may cause, that may come into play? I imagine for us here, we have the city's DOJ consent decree, the MDHR settlement agreement, we have brand imaging, and just would be curious to see your perspective on someone who did that research.
Yep. So I think with that one, you're right. There's a regional component. Just through some surveys that were done across a number of departments, usually candidates that had been hired identified the incentive bonus as third, fourth thing on their list. Obviously, I think that determining the amount that would have joined anyways would be helpful. But I mean, if someone's going to join and you ask them, do you want to join or do you want to join and I'll give you this check? I mean, most are still going to say well, sure, I'll take the incentive bonus. However, usually what I think is happening is you'll have an individual that has 3 options that they're looking at, all in this a certain geographic area. The amount of people that are just picking up and moving their entire life across the country for a one-time payment is likely not that large. I think that looking at Baltimore actually as an example where they kind of have this slate of options that people can choose. It's not necessarily designed this way, but almost in the sense of, we have this incentive for everybody. It's, the bucket's this big, but you get to pick the options that draw from the bucket. It seems like people appreciate that since, again, everyone's personal circumstances are going to be different. The childcare one, to go back to that, I mean, it's still very, very new. I think Baltimore, their pilot's going to be one of the, I think they've only got, there's less than 10 that I was able to find, at least with larger cities. So they're on the front edge of that. San Diego obviously was the initial one, but I think with those seem to be some of the biggest, both for recruitment and for retention, issues that people were looking at, which is the work-life balance. That's a big deal for everybody, but I think it's harder when you have a profession that's non-traditional in terms of hours and demand. A lot of departments have shifted to the 4 10-hour shifts a week. However, we've seen some more recently that have done shifts between the daytime shift might be shorter. They just work an additional day, whereas a nighttime shift is the one that they want people to work longer because it's harder to fill. That also allows them to provide more, again, to officers that need the flexibility, more daytime shifts. Sorry, there was one more. I was on the tip of my tongue, and it's now escaping me. I know the education one, that's the next thing that's being picked up, which is, if people need certifications, either the 2-year degree or just the accelerated certification program, how's that paid for? I think the fact that the city pays for it is good. That's definitely the trend that we're seeing from larger cities, as well as some of the cities in the metro area have recently picked up cadet programs that do cover tuition. I know Minnetonka, Edina are 2 examples that I came across. So I think, again, just the last thing on that, something I alluded to previously, This is where the survey data is extremely helpful with finding out, again, in your head, it might be that, well, if I pay everybody $50,000, everybody will be happy. That's not always the case. And what an individual officer or candidate's going to prioritize is going to be completely dependent on their situation. So I think understanding, where there's opportunities is definitely a good place to start.
Great, thank you. And so just given the regional component to the recruitment bonuses, I think it's valuable to understand, regionally what's happening in different police departments. And so are you seeing the same staffing issues that we are, and to what extent?
So the staffing issues exist nationwide. That's not, it doesn't seem to matter what places are doing. It's just a matter of where you see the difference is what they're doing to address it. For our region, if we're just speaking about the Midwest, although that's a fluctuating, space depending on who you ask, but just Minnesota, Wisconsin, Dakotas, Iowa, we have, I'll say fortunately, just for the sake of encapsulating that we're not in this kind of spiral, and that it hasn't really caught on here. Whether that's because it just hasn't been identified as not a priority, whatever that might be, it just hasn't. Whereas if you go out west, especially the northwest, well, I guess it's all the way top to bottom from Washington through California, you'll have just clusters where it's just spiraled and continues to go up. And just based on the timing that it's happening in, it's impossible to know if it's what the impact actually is. They're just before you have the data, everybody's just trying to keep up with the Joneses, whatever you want to call it. So I know St. Paul has struggled, and so has Duluth, as well as even looking at metro offices that are trying to recruit to fill 2 or 3 positions. They've had some challenges. That's why they've actually gone the cadet program route. And then just again to kind of reinforce that, I can go back to just explaining before that the candidate pool is only so big. And so, you can fix something in the immediate, or it always takes longer to develop your own talent internally. But there does seem to be a realization that might be the approach that that ends up being the most sustainable, rather than just offering a quick payment to get somebody over from another department.
Gotcha. So broadly here, but we've seen it in other parts of the country, that revolving door effect is less so here than in other parts, is what I'm summarizing there a little bit. Another question, you talked about the survey and the data point piece, so that's what this is about. Does the administration or MPD use surveys as a data point for process improvement for applicants in the hiring process for current staff or departing staff? Because I agree that I think that this is an invaluable tool for us to utilize.
I know there have been surveys in the past. Whether they were specifically related to recruiting, I don't know. I can get back. I'm happy to follow up on that one. And then I know there's a larger one that's in place right now. That's just a comparative benefits assessment analysis, just to see, including pay and everything else, kind of where Minneapolis falls with kind of what it would view as its peers or competition, I suppose, for recruits.
Great, yeah. If we could do an administrative follow-up, whether it's from you or OCS or the police department, on understanding the use of surveys, that would be great. And then I have another series of questions just here about, and these you might also, we need to do an administrative follow-up, but in your research, were you able to, kind of figure out whether or not MPD has explored? So these are a few of the things that you brought up. So one, educational incentives, housing incentives, childcare incentives, or tax credits. Have we explored that here at the city?
From the educational one, just from the standpoint of covering the tuition, there's that. So that's in place. Yeah. I believe there is, and I'd have to go reread the contract, but I thought there might be an education reimbursement that's kind of along the lines of what we offer for every other employee. But I don't know that there's anything specifically carved out as far as if you want to go back and pursue an advanced degree or something once you've been onboarded as an officer. The other ones, yeah, the housing incentive one, I do not know. The same with the tax credit. Like I said, with that one, that jumped out because it was fairly unique to Baltimore.
Yeah.
So I think that was one that was interesting, since that's another component to this conversation that's always around, living where you work,
Yeah,
especially with law enforcement.
Yeah, and the childcare is,
Yeah,
obviously,
that-
there's new pilots, so that's something that I think we could be really interested to learn a little bit more from that, especially as you talked about the 30 by 30 incentive.
Yep.
And I know that that is definitely one barrier, is that when women think about becoming police officers or firefighters, the childcare component of that and kind of figuring that out, I know is really important. So referral incentives, have we looked into that in the city?
I do not know. I know the city's used them in some capacity before, whether it was for police or not, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't think there's any currently operating
Okay.
program right now, but that was one that did come out as being beneficial since it's arguably one of your best tools.
Okay, and then workforce sharing. Do you know if we've explored that? I mean, I think having that type of flexibility, and again, when we're thinking about recruiting more women, my first job was in the corporate field, in Target, but they did a lot of workforce sharing, and so, two different individuals would share one job. I'm curious if that has been explored, because I think that could be an easy way for us to be a more flexible employer.
Yeah, I do not believe that that's being explored at this time. Again, I can always follow up to get a concrete response, but and then just to differentiate with the workforce sharing, there's both. Some departments have looked at workforce sharing as you described it, with having a position that's basically split into two part-time positions in order to provide that additional flexibility for people that might need it. The only downside is, or again, like the downside that's mentioned with that is it's, you still have to train two people, and it's, like 2 times more equipment. But again, if there's a longer term benefit to, retaining the people you need, then it's something to consider. The other one was again, I'll say workforce sharing again, but this was more a resource, like a collective resource pool where agencies have gotten together and essentially agreed upon, like certain qualifications for all of their officers, with the idea being in the event that there's, emergency or something where they need to increase their numbers quickly, they can draw from other agencies more easily than just calling in another jurisdiction and having them operate in your city. But that's one too that I know there are some places that have started looking at that.
Okay. And then the last one, you talked about the expedited hiring events. I have not heard of us doing that. Do you have any insight if we've looked into that at all?
I know they're doing a lot of events. I don't know that we're doing the expedited hiring in the way that it was described in this presentation.
Okay. It would be great to get a follow-up on that if we are utilizing the expedited hiring events as one of our recruitment tools. I will say this is, it's just grateful to hear about some of the creative ideas that have been done across the country. I think that we have a lot to learn here when we think about both recruiting new, but also retaining the good officers that we have. And so I'm really appreciative of this work. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Koski. I also put myself in queue because I had a number of questions as well as some comments, brief comments. So I did want to see if any of your research has shown any correlation to how these departments are also vetting to make sure that they're receiving the highest quality candidates. I think it's at this point, it's no secret that, last year we had a situation with a recruitment of an officer that also had a background of misconduct. So trying to pair this desire for some to, fill the ranks immediately, but making sure that as you're pursuing that, you're not also replenishing your ranks with the Derek Chauvins out there. So wanted to see if there was any insights on how the recruitment process are making sure that they're bringing in potential recruits who aren't going to bring on trauma in the future or a future lawsuit.
Absolutely, Chair Wansley. Also, it's going to bother me. So just let me. I just want to note. Sorry if I'm putting anybody to sleep. I don't have a lot of inflection in my voice right now, so it's. I know this has been a pretty monotone, delivery. So
we accept you as you are, Andrew.
I at least wanted to. It's not lost on me. I'm not doing it intentionally. This is about as much pitch as I have right now. So, anyways, Chair Wansley, to your point, yes, I know. I know internally. Again, whether stemming from the incident you mentioned or not, there have been more. I think checkpoints kind of in that process that have been put in place.
We definitely see that in a lot of other jurisdictions as far as how they're screening. I had an example from Cleveland, actually, where they had, it kind of highlights, again, like it's important to understand what the process looks like from the people that are running it, just so that we know what to expect. And this actually came up where I think council members there received a presentation and where that highlighted that they had hired 11 people, but then there was another part of it where they said it was out of 299 applicants. So again, it was 3.6% of the total applicants were hired. And so again, like what was trying to be pulled out there was, where are they falling off? I think that there's a kind of a twofold issue with like this topic, and on the one side, it's the importance of screening out individuals, that might be for various reasons that could be problematic. On the other side, I think one of the things that we've seen nationally is departments revisiting their process and what their requirements are, because some of those may or may not be necessary, or they may or may not be achieving the intended goals, and they could end up being essentially barriers to entry for certain parts of the population. I mean, again, I feel like I've had a couple where I've praised Baltimore, so I can ding them on one. I think they require that any previous criminal convictions, including misdemeanors and petty misdemeanors, have to be expunged before they can be accepted as an officer. Which, even little things like that creates another step that people have to go through before they'd be eligible to become an officer. So I think it's a balance. I don't have a better answer than that. Where I think everybody wants to screen out all of the bad actors as best they can, but then there's the other side where sometimes something that seems, it's like, well, this will be the best way we can do this, has sweeping unintended consequences that ends up excluding people that would have been, extremely good candidates. So, but yeah, obviously MPD can speak better to this than I can, but yeah, so I think that's one where it's important to note that, while there are more stages and just more eyes on things is always good.
And you mentioned, and thank you for just flagging this, because this means I need to do another follow-up with specifically Assistant Chief Gators, who I know in PHS I raised a similar question of what guardrails have been put in place. I never received that response, so I will follow up with MPD on that, which, as you mentioned, I'm pretty sure I can just get it from the horse's mouth. Second, do you happen to have demographic or ethnic demographic data that's broken down? I'm going back to slide 15, where it's, looking at the increases in percentage of candidates by those ethnic demographics, Black and African. That can mean a multitude of things. So one, to know if that could be broken down any further, or is it just basically aggregated?
Chair Wansley, that data, again, that was the way that it was classified in the system where I received the information from MPD. So I would, again, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I would assume that usually there's another layer that you can get into just to identify like the subgroups. So.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was just going to note that for a staff memo, likely to be answered by MPD as well, of asking for the subgroup data in relation to slide 15 about the applicants. Something else I wanted to also know, if we could get data based off of your research, is the examples that you reference here from across the country. Essentially, what is their police budget proportional to their entire city budget? I think it's no shocker. We spend a lot of money on Minneapolis Police Department here, and I'm pretty sure other cities are having to do the same. We're seeing that trend continue on the continuous overfunding of police, and we're not seeing necessarily ranks replenish at the workforce level, or necessarily seeing some of these benefits translate into actual bodies. So I'm always interested to know, what is that ratio of funding for one particular department as to the overall budget. So if there's any ways to get that information, that would be good in a follow-up staff memo. And also, just, that's another quick comment. I did want to reference, I believe in either the Public Health and Safety Committee from last term, MPD did come forward with some type of a report where they did know they were exploring something around childcare. So I know there's something on LIMS, at least related to MPD, where they were talking about additional strategies like this. And what I will name that as very concerning for me of seeing like some of these incentives, like for instance, there's the housing. Which one was that one?
Baltimore.
Baltimore. Just the idea that we would grant a housing subsidy for one segment of our workforce, and yet just a couple of weeks ago, we were fighting to even save a homeless shelter for $1.5 million. Similar idea around childcare. I know I'm doing some work on how do we expand childcare access for residents. And I would love to be able to see childcare accessibility be expanded for all city employees. So these particular carve-outs of social benefits that then only get relegated to one segment of a city workforce, which typically is police. And I often see it as very much modeling off of the military. As someone who is a socialist, the military is the one place where you get all the socialist benefits, and it's great for like poor and working class and Black and brown people. But how great would it be if we could make sure people could get access to full, tuition, to full paid childcare, to all these great benefits of fully funded housing without having to go into a particular career trajectory that might bring on additional trauma for themselves or those that they're serving. So I will name some of the concerns around the social benefits that's only being limited to one class of a workforce, and really looking at how do we look to expand it for everyone. And that's nothing on you. That's just a dynamic and just a reflection, observation. But I did want to know, I did see at some point last term where MPD was considering that. And it was just like, wow, could we give childcare to all of our employees who are also dealing with the struggles that comes with taking care of little ones, and while having to work to earn your living. But those are just some follow-up questions and, comments I had to make. But with that, I will see if there's anyone. Oh, I see Vice Chair Palmisano and Q.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple of questions for you, Director Hawkins. Speaking in generalities here, the three Minnesota examples that you cite, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth, they all offer very little in terms of incentives when compared with some of your nationwide examples. Did you get a sense as to why that is? Some of these other entities offer pretty significant incentives, bonuses, reimbursements. Was this due to, what did you call it, one-upping each other? I guess, is there anything to be gleaned from that or not?
Chair Wansley, Vice Chair Palmisano, yeah, it's a good observation, and I think it's the term I was using was regionality to it, where again, just based on how much whatever the pot's available, how much do we want to use to certain things? I think understandably there's a high degree of kind of looking over the fence at what everybody else is doing, and if it's not something you need to compete with, then why do it? Which isn't always the best way to to do things just because somebody else is not. But yeah, in the state of Minnesota, we haven't seen a lot of like those types of programs that we're seeing in other places where they're trying to compete. Obviously for Seattle, the whole West Coast is in kind of a race right now to attract people from various like regions. Baltimore has a number of other major cities to compete with, and so I think they kind of end up becoming like functions of necessity, right? I think that's at least how they're viewed. But the education one is the one right now that seems to be building as far as paying for the certification, whether it's the 2-year program through like a technical college or the abbreviated certification course that's available to people if they have a 2 or 4 year degree. Minneapolis is doing that. Again, I think it's actually something when just going through the city's recruitment website that maybe could be highlighted more. Because that's something that St. Paul, I think, has just recently been able to start doing more of that through grant funding. And then I think Duluth, it was for every 500 hours you work, it's X amount of dollars towards your tuition. So I think that's kind of and we're seeing like some of the suburban cities that have been doing this as well. It's not on the same scale, where it's just trying, just to fill a couple positions, but they're covering the entirety of expenses for individuals that want to pursue that route. So I think a lot of it's the regional impact, and I think there's also like a slight part of it just from reading just some commentary during this process where if nobody's offering it and you're the first one to do it, is that what kicks off the cycle? So all of a sudden you offer something that nobody might, perhaps was asking for, and now everybody else has to compete with it, and then it becomes a kind of game of one-upsmanship.
Yeah. Thank you for that insight. And I can't remember a time that we didn't pay for all of those kinds of programs. So I think that's a good insight that maybe we should highlight that more, but we've always considered that to be routine, particularly through our Pathways programs. In your review, does officer pay in Minneapolis sufficiently offset the incentives that are being received elsewhere? And to answer that, I understand you'd have to factor in things like cost of living.
Chair Wansley, Vice Chair Palmisano, I don't have an answer on that one right now. However, I know that officer pay, I think especially with the new contract, I think it's #1 now in the state. However, kind of, I guess, how that compares against cost of living and things of that nature. I don't know if that's part of the review that MPD was doing. A really good example of somebody doing that to a degree that's beyond thorough is Austin. Where they looked at beyond just, I think, again, back to my point from before, where I think a lot of times this is it's such a expedited race to, pay the most, to offer the most, that then they're not considering a lot of other factors. And so, just paying the most doesn't necessarily mean that people will earn the most. So Austin had, I think they brought in a consultant to do a deep dive that looked at their officer pay and compared it to a number of large cities in Texas that they kind of viewed as competing for officers. It factored in the housing market, the rental market, the healthcare plans, the health conditions like that were common for people in that area, to basically break down every single remotely economic data point they could to determine like where you came out on the other side. So again, while I don't know where it would fall here, I mean, it's certainly that analysis is possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that is everyone in queue thus far. Thank you so much, Andrew, for that thorough presentation as always. Seeing no further discussion, I will ask the clerk to file that report. And with that, colleagues, we have concluded all business that have come before today's committee. And if there's no objections, we are adjourned.